Good morning, church. Man, it has been like a brutally cold weekend, hasn't it? And I know that many of you are doing that picking up leaves thing and putting the patio furniture away and kind of winterizing your home. But I'm glad you took some time this morning to come into this place. This is such a beautiful gathering, and I just love the fact that we can come and celebrate that living hope. Amen? And what a joy it is to have you here today. One of the things I want to mention to you as it relates to this cold weather is I don't know if you knew this or not, but Chambersburg has what's called a cold weather shelter. Believe it or not, we have homeless people on the streets in Chambersburg, and our Grand Point Church has been staffing the cold weather shelter on Sunday evenings. There are two shifts. We have people there from 7 to 9:30, and then the second shift is from 9:30 to midnight. And basically what that is just a host. It's helping to check people in and get them acclimated to the shelter, getting them settled in. And I just found out this week that we have several vacancies in that. If you would consider at all making that a part of your ministry, whether it's one time a month or every other Sunday night or every Sunday night, we have specific needs right now from the 7 to 9:30 shift. And that's all it is. I mean, you might even be able to watch a football game with the people coming in there, but just come on out. I tell you what, if you would be interested in that or would like to know more information, you stop by the hub right out here. Just put down your name, contact information, and then we'll contact you if you'd be able to help out with that as well. But I want to welcome you back here. If you're here for the very first time, let me just introduce you to our theme for the month, which is called Code of Honor. One of the things that we're doing this week is talking about how do we honor relationships, people in relationships. Now, when we use this word honor, sometimes we use it in phrases like if I were to say, it's an honor for me to be your pastor. By the way, it is. I truly mean that. It is an honor for me to be your pastor, just to be with you every Sunday morning. It is an honor. By that I mean this is a privilege. It's a response of gratitude that I have for this privilege to be your pastor. Now, if you were to say, I remember back when I was on the honor roll in high school. I can't for several reasons. One of them is I never was there. But so you might think, okay, honor in that particular context is an achievement. It's a goal. It's something accomplished. But when we're using the word honor within this message series, we're talking about what it means. It denotes this admiration or this respect or esteem that we show to another person because it's their right to receive that honor or it's due to them. So that's kind of how we're using this word. So in our first week, last Sunday, we talked about what it means to honor God. Because of all the relationships that you will ever have in your life, honoring God is the most important one. If you get your relationship with God right, all other relationships go a little bit better. In fact, much better. So we're talking about what it means to honor God, and we use the story of David and Goliath to illustrate what it means to honor God. And in that story, David, you know the story, David was faced with this huge obstacle in his life. It was a giant in his life that he was able to destroy or bring down because of his number one commitment to honor his God. Now, just in case there's some Dallas Cowboy fans here who think that God is on your side because you slew the Giants last Sunday, right? Let me just say, just hold on, because you're going to be plundered by the Vikings tonight, and then you'll begin to develop your confidence. So, you know what? I got to watch my trash talk up here, because if you remember last Sunday, it was trash talk that got Goliath killed. So I want to watch what I say. But isn't that story amazing? I love the story of David and Goliath. That's one of those stories that just kind of makes me want to see God for who he really is, because then I will be able to walk in the confidence that David had in facing his giant as well. So today we're going to talk about what it means to honor the friends that are in your life. All of you have friends. Some of you have really close friends. Some of you have a lot of casual friends. But we all have friends in our life. So we're going to talk about what it means to value those friendships and to honor those friendships. Next Sunday, we're going to jump ahead into chapter 23, I believe it is. And we're going to talk about what it means to honor those people with special needs. Because we're going to look at this beautiful story of Mephibosheth. And I can't, to be honest with you, I can't wait for next Sunday. I'm not sure how we're going to unpack this yet, but Mephibosheth, have you heard that story? You will, you will. It is the most beautiful story. And you know what? It reminds me that all of us in our spiritual lives are special needs people. And God, in his great mercy, has made it possible for us to eat at the King's table, even though we had these special needs. So we're going to unpack that, talk about what it means to value those people in our lives. And then week number 4, the last week in this series, we're going to talk about what it means to honor those members of the opposite sex that we have in our lives, in our relationships, whether it's in business or private or social relationships. And there's a heightened sensitivity all across our culture right now of what that looks like and what that means, and how do we as men best relate to women? How do we honor women in our lives, in our culture, through our actions, through our speech? And women, how do you respond to men in a way that honors them? And we're going to kind of unpack a very culturally sensitive issue using the story of David and Bathsheba. So all of these stories that we're talking about come from the illustration of the life of David in 1st and 2nd Samuel. And I want to remind you that every Sunday we provide a study guide for you. If you pick up a bulletin when you come into the service, there's a study guide in there that is specifically related to the text that we're working through, and it's designed for you to use in your small group, in your private devotions, or maybe even in your Sunday school class, just to continue some of the discussion or to perhaps go a little bit deeper. Then on the back page, we provide a blank page for you to take notes, because if you just hear what I say, you're going to forget everything in about 30 minutes, right? So if you write it down, you'll remember it a little bit. Here's one that we found last week. This bulletin was left in the sanctuary. So these are sermon notes. So if you want to Super Mario this thing, go ahead and do it. Right? I don't know who this was. I mean, they didn't take it with them. They left it here. But I want to know, whoever that artist is, man, we might be able to use you sometime. So however you want to take notes, right? Here it is. This is another version that you can get. But all of these messages that we do, I hope that we leave here today kind of understanding what it means to value friendship. So to dive into today's message, let me ask you this. What is your definition of a friend? How would you define a friend? Well, here are a couple quotes that I came up with. The first one is from Bernard Meltzer, and he says this. He says, "A true friend is someone who thinks that you're a good egg even though he knows you're slightly cracked." It's not bad, is it? That's a good friend. Another quote goes like this. It says, "A true friend laughs at your jokes when they're not so good and sympathizes with your problems when they're not so bad." In other words, they kind of make you feel good about what you do. Here's one that is anonymous. "A true friend is one who comes in when the whole world has gone out." Man, that's deep, isn't it? You know, this one was written in the dark corner of some coffee shop somewhere, right? Right? But see, of all of these attempts to define friendship, I think there's one better that kind of puts this all into perspective, and this might be mine, but here's what I believe. I believe you know who your friends are when it's time to move. You know what I mean? When it's time to move, when that moving truck rolls up, right, and it's time to pack up, and it's time to clean some of the parts of your house that haven't seen a dust rag for years, and it's time to kind of load all of that heavy furniture that would give the Incredible Hulk a hernia, that's when you know who your friends are, right? When they show up to help you move. See, a poser is that person that says, "Oh man, I love to help, but we're going to be away that day." It's 2 months out, right? 2 months out. Where are you going to be? Well, obviously not here, right? But the real friend is the one who shows up with the work gloves on, who is willing to have their back hurt because of your furniture, right? And then when they're on their way out the door, they turn around and say, "Hey, do you need any help tomorrow?" That's what a true friend is. Well, the Bible speaks a lot about friendships. It speaks about their importance. It speaks about their purpose. And it even gives us some examples of what true friendship is like. But what we're going to see today is what perhaps might be the truest example of friendship that ever shows up in Scripture. It is the story of David and Jonathan. Now, let me give you a little bit of backstory on Jonathan. We know David, right? We were introduced to David over the last 2 weeks. David was that youngest son of Jesse, who was too young yet to be in the Israelite army, but nevertheless, when he came out to bring his brothers the orange slices and Capri Suns, right, at the battlefield, he was the guy who stepped in and said, "I will take Goliath. Who is this man that he should defy the armies of the living God? I'll fight him." So David steps in Perhaps from our perspective, the least qualified of all the men to fight this giant, but he does it. And he defeats the giant. So we know David, but we don't know a whole lot about Jonathan. Jonathan, on the other hand, is the oldest son of King Saul, which simply means that he would be like the prince. He would be next in line for the throne. And he's this guy that everybody likes Jonathan. He's kind of a good-natured guy, and he's very popular among the people. And he's kind of a beast on the battlefield. I mean, this guy does some crazy things. You can read all about Jonathan in 1 Samuel chapter 18. And the one story that I love about Jonathan was one day he's walking along like he's down here and there's this huge cliff beside him. And on the top of the cliff, there's a whole bunch of Philistines. And they're up there trash talking. They're yelling down at Jonathan and trash talking. And Jonathan looks up. He looks up and says, okay, you guys want to smack talk like that? Just watch out. And then he turns into this Navy SEAL, and he begins to scale this cliff with his bare hands. He gets to the top. He kills 20 of these Philistines while the rest of them are running away. This was not your ordinary kind of a soldier. Furthermore, he was not your ordinary kind of a leader. He was not one of those military leaders that was always a few steps behind his men. He was out in front, primarily because he wanted to protect them and thought a whole lot about them. So he was almost too good to be true. Like this guy was royalty. He was a great leader. He was a great warrior. He was loved by everyone. But, watch this, I love this, more than anything else, Jonathan loved the Lord. And when you find someone that just is in love with the Lord, you're going to find someone that everybody likes. You're going to find someone that kind of has this attractional side to them. When you find someone that loves the Lord, he was faithful to the Lord, and his loyalty was always rooted in the Lord. This was Jonathan. We're not sure where all this came from or how this happened, but he was a man who evidently loved the Lord. And while he was known for being a great military leader, he's perhaps best known for his friendship with David. David and Jonathan, we know this, some of us know this story. Well, Jonathan and David met right after David killed Goliath. When Goliath went down, Saul, the king of the Israelite army, said to Abner, the captain of the army, I want you to go out there and find out who that kid is. I want you to find out who he is, who his daddy is, and then bring him back to the tent because I want to meet him. And so that's exactly what happened. And here's what we see in 1 Samuel chapter 17. As soon as David returned from killing the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with David still holding the Philistine's head. So they go back to the tent, right? Now, when David killed Goliath, he pulled out Goliath's sword, cut off his head. He's carrying the head of the giant back to this tent. That's how David and Jonathan first meet. David walks in carrying the decapitated head of a giant. Don't you ever tell me the Bible is boring. This is good stuff, right? This is good stuff. And immediately, back here at the tent, David is speaking to Saul, and it says in chapter 18, verse 1, after David had finished talking with Saul, Jonathan became one in spirit with David. Did you ever hear of a kindred spirit? This is what a kindred spirit is. He became one in spirit. Some of your translations might say their souls were knit together. There's something that happened there. We're not sure what that was that kind of made them immediate kindred spirits. Perhaps it was their evident love for the Lord. When you find somebody else that has the same passionate love for the Lord that you have, you kind of become knit together with them. There's that kindred spirit. There's things that you can talk about. There's life that you can share. Maybe it was because they were both these strong militant guys, right? Jonathan was one of these guys that took out 20 Philistines with his bare hands, and now here comes David holding the head of a giant. Maybe it was that knit them together. I'm not sure. But they became one in spirit with David, and it says, Jonathan says, and he loved David as himself. Jump ahead to verse 3. It says, and Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. And we're going to go one more to chapter 20, verse 17. Jonathan had David reaffirm his oath out of love for him because he loved him as himself. Three times, this relationship is described as Jonathan loving David as himself. That's some pretty strong language. That might even be a little bit uncomfortable for some of us, but let me remind you what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 22 when one of the Pharisees or the teachers of the law asked him one day, Jesus, come on, Master, of all the laws, which is the greatest? Do you remember Jesus' response? Jesus came back and he said in Matthew 22, verse 37, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all of your mind. And then Jesus said, you know what, this is the greatest commandment, but the second is like it, right? Verse 39, love your neighbor as yourself. This was the kind of relationship that Jonathan and David had. This was a pure biblical relationship. Now, I know there's all kinds of interpretations out there about what their relationship was like. Some interpretations even say this is biblical grounds for homosexuality. I don't think it's that. I think that's destroying a beautiful kind of relationship that they have with each other. And it's biblical. It's based on the fact that they had this kindred spirit bound together in the Lord. Now, the friendship of David and Jonathan kind of seems a little over the top for some of us men, right? Because this kind of smacks of intimacy, right? If you're loving somebody as yourself, this kind of means that you're leaning into that a little bit more than what we're comfortable with. But let me just say this. This is the bottom line of friendship. This is kind of the very essence of friendship. So in response to this cold weather, I have an acquaintance in Lancaster who posted this online this week, and he said this, he posted this message. It said, hey, don't forget to bring your pets indoors for the winter. And then it showed a picture of his dirt bike in the laundry room, right? Right, so sometimes we're uncomfortable saying, we love a person, at least as men. We're more apt to say, we love this, or we love this kind of things, or toys, or teams, or whatever it might be. But really, the essence of true friendship is the very fact that we love somebody else just as we love ourselves. Make no mistake about it. Friendship is a gift from God. Friendship is a gift from God. And some of you know the value of friendship quite well, and others of you maybe are still looking for that friend just to come into your life. Well, God knew that David needed a close friend for the valleys that he was about to walk through, so he brought Jonathan right into his life. In his book, The Four Loves, C.S. Lewis says this. He says, in friendship, we think that we have chosen our peers. But in reality, a few years difference between the dates of our births, a few more miles between certain houses, the choice of one university instead of another, the accident of a topic being raised or not raised at the first meeting, any of these chances may have kept us apart. Did you ever think about that? Why is it that you have people in your lives, and what are the chances, that you're going to meet somebody that's going to be that kindred spirit? But then C.S. Lewis says this, he says, but for a Christian, there are, strictly speaking, no chances. No chances. A secret master of ceremonies has been at work. Christ, who said to the disciples, you have not chosen me, but I have chosen you, can truly say to every group of Christian friends, you are not chosen for another, but I have chosen you for another. The friendship is not a reward for our discriminating and good taste in finding another out, but it is the instrument by which God reveals to each of us the beauties of others. Friendship is a beautiful thing, and it is designed by God. It is God that allowed you to meet that person that is your friend. Even think about a marriage. What is the mystery? Isn't there a mystery in that you would meet someone that you would spend the rest of your life with as your best friend? But God does that. Friendship is a gift from God. He arranges our meeting each other because he knows what we need. And he knows who to bring into our lives for that next journey, that next valley that we're going to walk through. God will bring into our lives people as friends, and my goal in this message today is to help us establish a code of honor that will acknowledge those special people that God has brought into our lives. That somehow you would recognize the value of the friendship that you have, or maybe it would even prompt you to be that kind of a person to somebody else. The reality is close, intimate friends are rare. They're rare. You may have one, maybe two, but usually you don't have more than three real close, intimate friends throughout your life. And then there are those people that said, you know what, I've never had that. Never had a close, intimate friend. And some would even say, you know what, I don't want that. I just want a bunch of friends. I want a whole bunch of casual friends. Well, listen, let me share this with you. Wherever you're at on the number of friends or your feelings between that close, intimate friends or a bunch of casual friends, you need a friend. You need a friend. What I want to do through this remainder of our time this morning is I want to identify 4 characteristics of true friendship. 4 characteristics of true friendship that we see in this story of David and Jonathan. And we're gonna just work through chapter 18 and identify these 4 characteristics. The first one is simply this. Friendship is a gift from God. We recognize that kind of as that umbrella. But the first characteristic of friendship that comes from God is this. A true friend is willing to sacrifice. A true friend is willing to sacrifice. You don't have to beg a close friend for a favor, which was certainly the case with Jonathan. In chapter 18, verse 4, here's what Jonathan does after he has this friendship. He took off the robe that he was wearing. Remember who he was? His father was the king. So Jonathan most likely would have been next in line for the king. I don't know if that had any significance to the robe that he was wearing. I have an idea that it does. But Jonathan took off the robe that he was wearing and he gave it to David along with his tunic and even his sword, his bow. Yeah, he had a little Robin Hood in him, right? And his belt. He took all of that off and he gave it to David. He wanted David to have something that belonged to him and something that was meaningful to him. Friends do that. That's what friends do. They're never stingy with their possessions. And then later on in chapter 20, verse 4, Jonathan said to David, whatever you want me to do, I'll do for you. That's what friends say. That's the word of a close friend. One of the most classic questions for Christianity is, why did Jesus have to die on a cross? Well, the answer to that question is rather simple. The answer to that question is he didn't have to die. He was not obligated to do that. He's God. But he chose to. He chose to do that. Now, what does that say about our God? That says that God's grace is not an obligation, but God's grace is out of his generosity. We don't worship a God who's obligated to us, but we worship a God who is generous toward us. And see, without the grace of God, we would still be in the condemnation of our sins. But God, in his incredible love for us, sent us a friend by the name of Jesus who was willing to sacrifice his life on our behalf. So now there is no condemnation to those who are in Christ Jesus because there was a friend who was willing to sacrifice. That's what friends do. Illustrated very much by our friend in Jesus. See, Jonathan gave up his robe. You know what Jesus did? Jesus actually took all of our filthy rags and clothed us with a robe of righteousness. So now when God looks at us, he doesn't see our filth, but he sees our righteousness. And just like, Jonathan was willing to give up his throne, Jesus gave up the throne. He got off that throne, put on human flesh, came into our world, suffered and died so that he could hand us the keys to the throne room. This is what a friend does. And like Jonathan, who eventually died for David, Jesus died for his friends because a real friend thrives when his friend succeeds. Without the gospel, without the grace of God, we cannot succeed. And who do you think thrives when he gives it to us? When he gives us his life? Jesus does. Jesus thrives. It brings him glory when you and I step into that relationship and receive the gift of his sacrifice. Without the gospel, without the grace of God, we cannot succeed. Jesus said in John chapter 13, in response to all this, he said this, he said, as I have loved you, and he loved us through the sacrifice of his son, as I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you're my disciples if you have this kind of love for one another. A true friend is willing to sacrifice. Number 2, a true friend will have your back. A true friend will defend you in whatever situation you get yourself into. See, as soon as David kills Goliath, Saul immediately put David to use. he said to Abner, I want you to find out who that kid is because he will be advantageous to me. He's going to make me look good. If I can just take this guy and put him into my service and have him work for me, right, I'm going to look a whole lot better. So he brought David in and hired him. He employs David, and God blessed David in everything that he did. And because of his success, Saul gets paranoid, because he sees all the praise of the people going to David. He sees David getting some of the accolades. He sees people praising David, and this makes Saul feel a little bit threatened. So he begins to get a little bit angry, and he kind of works through this, but he lets it get the best of him. And one time, now watch this, you're going to find out this to be a little bit odd, but one time they're sitting at the dinner table. It is Saul, and it is Jonathan, and it's David, and it's some of the other, household members. They're sitting at the dinner table, and Saul is so agitated and so frustrated because of David's success that he picks up his spear and throws it at him. Apparently, there was no rule about bringing spears to the dinner table. It's probably one of those things to me that kind of ranks up there with bringing your cell phone in the category of insecurities, right? You don't bring spears, you don't bring cell phones to the dinner table, right? Oh man, let's move on from that one, right? But he picks up this spear and throws it at him, but he missed. And so Jonathan steps in and he says to his father in chapter 19, verse 4, he's like, come on, Dad. He goes, what are you thinking? Let not the king do wrong to his servant David. He didn't do anything wrong to you. And what he has done has benefited you greatly. He took his life into his hands when he killed the Philistine. The Lord won a great victory for all of us that day. Do you remember? And you saw it and you were glad. And then he says, why then would you do wrong to an innocent man like David by killing him for no reason? Do you see what happens? Jonathan steps in and defends his friend David, even against his own dad. That's what a true friend will do. When you have a friend, when you have a kindred spirit, they will stand in defense even against his own father who was ready to take David's life. He had David's back because he was a true friend. And the third thing is this. The third characteristic of true friendship is a true friend will give you the freedom to be yourself. Now, when you have a friend who's a kindred spirit, knitted to your own soul, right? You don't have to explain why you do what you do. You just do it. You just do it. This next verse is a little bit odd and might even be discomforting to some of us, but it illustrates what a close friend can offer. See, after this spear-chucking incident at the dinner table, David leaves the palace. I think I would too. I don't know how much more of that you can do. You dodge one spear, you're like, this could come at me again. So he leaves the palace. He flees. He's now out into the fields of Bethlehem. He's kind of hiding out. And Saul is now angry at Jonathan because Jonathan stood up for him. And he says to Jonathan, you are the son of a perverse and rebellious woman. He threw his wife under the bus with this, right? That's what you do. You just make it, it's not my son. You're the son of this perverse and rebellious woman. And he picked up his spear and threw it at Jonathan. He's got this thing with chucking spears at people. He threw a spear at his own son, but he missed again. So Jonathan now leaves. He gets up and he leaves and he gets up from the table. He goes out to find David. So he's now out in the fields. And when he saw David, when David saw Jonathan coming, here's what it says in chapter 20. Verse 41, David rose from the south side and he ran and he met Jonathan and he fell on his face to the ground and he bowed down 3 times and they kissed each other and wept together, but David wept the most. All this is to say that when your heart is broken, you can bleed all over a friend like this and they will understand. They'll understand. Listen, they won't confront you in your misery, throw a few Bible verses at you and tell you to get a grip. No, they'll sympathize with you. Right? When a good friend is hurting, you let them hurt. When a good friend needs to vent, you let them vent. When a good friend needs to cry, you let them cry. In fact, cry with them. Kind of just let them be themselves. That's what a true friend will do. A true friend doesn't bail, right? When things get tough and people get a little emotional and they get broken, a true friend does not run away from there. They're right there with you, and you can be yourself, and it doesn't matter what that looks like. And finally, a true friend is someone who just is this constant source of encouragement to you. When Saul discovered that David was not coming back, right? Saul's still at the table, probably sharpening his spear for another chuck, right? David's gone, now Jonathan is gone. So he's like, wait a minute, these guys just can't take off like this. So in chapter 23, Saul calls his forces together and he says, let's go get them. Let's go get them. So now there's a hitman after David, and it's Jonathan's father, Saul. David's out there in the wilderness, and at any moment, behind any rock, behind any bush, behind any hill, Saul and his men might be hiding out, just ready to take him out. Well, Jonathan knows about this. He knows about this scheme, and what does he do? Verse 15, he runs out there, and when David was at Horesh in the desert of Ziph, Jonathan learned that Saul had come out to take David's life. So here's what he did. Saul's son Jonathan went to David at Horesh, and he encouraged him in God. I don't know what that looked like. We're not given the details, but most likely it was David. I'm just going to clue you in. Dad and his men are after you. They're after you. They're coming to get you. And I don't know if they prayed together or what they did, but encouraged him in God. That's the kind of friend to have, by the way. And that's the kind of friend to be. See, Jonathan sees David at the very lowest moment of his life. He's frightened. He's on the run, stumbling through the wilderness, and he goes out to bring him a little bit of encouragement. Someone once said that loneliness is the most desperate of all English words, and I believe that's right. It's no fun to be lonely. Being lonely is desperate. And especially when you're going through a difficult time, when you're stumbling through some kind of a wilderness, when you feel like someone is against you and out to get you, you need that friendship. Otherwise, you're going to be in a lonely place, and it's going to be a hard place to be. Jonathan is a biblical description of what I believe is true friendship, and here's why I say that. Jonathan lived the kind of life and modeled a life that was free from being consumed by the world and all of these selfish ambitions. You and I don't have the friends that we would like to have, and we're not the friends that we ought to be because we have somewhere in our minds justified that we don't have time to do that. We don't have time for friendship. I mean, we got our lives to live. We've got our businesses to run. We've got our stuff to do, and we have all this stuff that we need to do ourselves. We really don't have the time to pour into somebody else. But Jonathan did. Jonathan took that time. Of all the things that we see in these characteristics of true love, every single one of them took time. And Jonathan was willing to do that. You know, that's the kind of people you just like to be around, though, isn't it? People that have time for you. You kind of lean into that. You make those connections. Jonathan was also one of these guys that not only had time or took time for people, but he was one of these guys who put the Lord first in his life. He put others second, and then he put himself third. Right? He kind of had things in the right order. You never had to worry about his loyalty. You never had to question his motives. He wanted others to succeed and grow, and he poured himself into making that happen. Who doesn't want to be around someone like that? And then Jonathan was also the guy that took time to care. He took time to care. In fact, he went out of his way to make David feel like he was the most important person in the world. That's what a true friend does. They make somebody else feel important. And I would say to you again, who doesn't want to be around someone like that? Now let me wrap this up this morning by just saying this. You might expect a conclusion on something so personal like this to have a very personal application. And I want that to happen. I want you to kind of evaluate these characteristics of friendship and maybe ask yourself the question, am I that kind of a person? Am I that kind of a person that people love to be around? Do I take the time just to be with people? Do I take the time to care for them? Do I take the time to make them succeed and pour into them so that they succeed and have that as a greater value than my own success? Is that who I am? It's good to make that personal application, but here's what I want to do. I want to make this a kind of a church-wide application this morning, because I believe that the culture of Grand Point Church is already well on its way to modeling this kind of friendship. I see all through this church those kinds of relationships already happening. I hear from Sunday school classes, and I hear from circle groups where people are gathered together and they're praying for someone. They're helping them through these kinds of journeys, right? They're helping them through difficult times. We're well on our way for this, but I would love to see that culture go to a next level. You know what? We just unpacked this great vision for Grand Point Church on Vision Sunday, and I love the vision that we have there, but hear me on this. Hear me on this. People are not going to be attracted to our music. People are not going to be attracted to our lights. They're not going to be attracted to our amazing facility. They're not going to be attracted to all these multi-sites that we have out there. Listen, I love all that stuff. They're great, and all of those things are intended to engage people in a connection with God. That's their purpose, but ultimately, they're not the things that will attract. You know what will? People will be attracted to a community that is saturated and transformed by the gospel of Jesus Christ, where everyone present at their core loves the Lord their God with all their heart, soul, mind, and strength, and loves their neighbor as themselves. That's what will make us an attractive church. And that's my vision, growing vision for Grand Point Church. That we would be a community of friends that would be Davids and Jonathans to each other, where we would lean in and help each other through life, because we all have these moments where we're on the run, right? We have these desperate kind of places in our lives, and we just kind of need to pour in and be those friends to each other. Listen, this is not something that we should be. This is something that we must be. This is something that we must be. People will be attracted to a place where the members are willing to sacrifice for each other. People will be attracted to a place where others will stand with you to overcome hurts, habits, and hang-ups. People will be attracted to a place where you can be yourself without being judged. People will be attracted to a place where you are encouraged at every stage in your life. Every time we gather, let me just give you some real practical applications right now. Every time that we gather, we have an opportunity to do this. Every single time we come into this place on a Sunday morning, you have an opportunity to do this. Let me just give you a few things that you can do. I was almost going to kind of give you this story. Someone sent me a list of 10 reasons why you should sit at different places in the sanctuary on a Sunday morning. See, I know that most of you have your set places where you sit. I can count on it. I can look and I can see these are your seats. So I was gonna jack that up this morning by telling you next Sunday, completely reverse sides. Go to a different place until this week, I learned of a group that meets right back here in this corner. The final 3 pews on this side have become a small group. So I was at a funeral yesterday, and people from those 3 rows were showing up at the funeral because they learned to know each other in that section of the sanctuary. So that's what I want you to do. Wherever you're sitting, I'm not going to tell you where to sit in the sanctuary. In fact, lean into the people that you sit close to, get to know them, and pour your life into them. But every Sunday, make it a goal to introduce yourself to someone that you don't know. Because here's what will happen. That person that you introduced yourself to will leave this place on a Sunday, and they will feel like they have just gained a friend. Someone just talked to me today. Someone that I didn't know introduced themselves to me. One person, if you do that to one person, you will make a difference in their lives. You will expand the friendship that happens here. The next thing I would like you to do, if you see someone sitting alone, sit with them or invite them to sit with you. Invite them into your section, right? You have a section where you invite them into that. I don't think that anyone should ever have to sit alone in church. You know what I mean? This is a place where we're family. This is a place where we can. Now, some people want to do that. If they want to be alone, respect that. But kind of look for them. and bring them into your circle as well. Number 3, take someone out for lunch. I don't know what you do after you leave this service. This is kind of in the middle. Like the first service, they go out for breakfast. The last service, they go for lunch. I don't know what you do, but invite someone to go somewhere with you. Maybe it's even into your circle, like into your small group. If you have a group that meets in your home, maybe you just want to invite someone into that and say, hey, come on out tonight. We have a few people, meet in our home tonight, and we're going to do some pizza or something like that, and we're going to just kind of hang out. Invite someone into that. It will change their lives. And number 4, send someone a note of encouragement. You saw in the announcements this morning, Rodney said this would be a great month to encourage someone in Kids Point Ministry. It's always a good day to encourage someone in Kids Point Ministry. Man, they're pouring out over there. Some of them are serving in like 2 hours of their time on Sunday morning, serving our kids and our grandkids, and encourage them. You see in our lobby all these blue shirt people out there. Man, you just find out who they are, send them a note of encouragement. It will change their lives. One of the things that Pastor Chad kind of encourages us to do as a staff is to send 3 thank you notes. I think he says 5, but I changed it to 3. That's easier. Is it 5 or 3? It's 5. 5 thank you notes a week to someone here at the church. And man, some weeks we get that, and other times it's like, I just didn't get that. But you know what? One note can change somebody's life. One note can make someone feel like a champion. And all it takes is you to do that. So here's what I want to do. I'm going to ask the team to come up right now to lead us in our closing song. But I just want to challenge you with this today. As a church, as Grand Point Church, I know it's my prayer to be a greater friend, to give more time to friendships. And I want you to make that as well, because I believe our culture can just grow to become more friendly here as we illustrate the David and Jonathan kind of relationship. Let's stand together, and I want to pray for you. God, today it is a great moment to be here. I love these people that are here in this room today. And it is a beautiful thing. This is no accident that we're together. This is by your design that we're all here. And I believe it's even by your design today that we're sitting next to someone that we're next to, or maybe in this section of the sanctuary that we're in. And God, my prayer would be today that we would not see that as just some kind of a chance, but that we would see it as a divine opportunity for us to get to know someone, introduce ourselves to someone that we don't know, and make a friend. But God, I pray that this would go deeper than just acquaintances, but that we would learn how to do life together as we share these characteristics of friendship with each other. But most of all, God, I want to thank you for being our friend, a friend who loves so much that you gave us a friend in Jesus, who was willing to give and sacrifice so that we might live. God, help us to model that well, to model that kind of love and friendship with each other. And I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.